Can I add something to that,
Simon?
Yeah, sure. Just really just to reiterate what Bernardo was saying, just the fact that we perceive the world from one localized point of view, it implies that our view of it must be limited, because to get an accurate view of reality, we would have to perceive it simultaneously from all possible points of view. So just the very fact, and then all we would perceive then is an utter blackness. But just the fact that the perception always takes place from a localized point of view.
I understand where it's coming from. These are interesting, let's say, deep thoughts, right? But localized is a reference to the experience. He is referencing the experience in order to describe the situation of the experience. Be careful. It is when you are dealing with this paradox, right? Let me just call it the paradox. So, the paradox. It's very easy to sometimes jump into physicalist mentality about what is spatially and temporally available from the experience, and using that as a framework for describing where the experience is within the larger picture, encompassing that realm that you cannot access, right? So it's like the shrinking of the experience within the larger scope of things, right? And I'm deliberately avoiding not to saying at large, right? So be careful that it's not confused. I'm not saying this particularly to Rupert Spira, but in general, when thinking about these matters, that what's conventional thinking about your experience is to some extent still transposed into the idealist approach, right? Or the basic idealist approach to thinking about metaphysics or doing metaphysics. Now, there's also another thing that I might try to settle. My point of view, that metaphysics is not the result of the thinking. That's not metaphysics. Metaphysics is the thinking, is the philosophy, right? It's like it is comparable to epistemology and ethics. Those are kinds of thinking, right? As is metaphysics, or should be, or that thinking that I would like to call metaphysics is that thinking I'm referring to. But sometimes metaphysics is used to describe the result of the thinking. What is your metaphysics, right? Then they describe, yes, there's a world here, there's a world there. These are conclusions from the philosophy I would call metaphysics, right? So be aware of this conflating of the understanding of the term, right? Now, this might also stem from a general neglect of doing metaphysics, or ridiculing, or even sort of having no clue that this is very, very fundamentally important to do, right? This thinking. Now, idealism is not a metaphysics. It's a conclusion of metaphysics, for what I can understand from what these two guys have been saying in recent years, right? Idealism is the conclusion that everything is mind. Then idealism is not a metaphysics. It is the result of metaphysics, right? I would like to point that out also. And I might, have to, redo my thinking about how they approach this, right? But it's a good idea to talk about, differentiate between the thinking done and the results based on that thinking, but is conflated within the same terms, so to say, right? And the barriers between when something is a kind of thinking and then when it's some kind of result of thinking is putting even another layer of complication onto doing this kind of thinking, right? Okay.
Or what is perceived is always relative to that point of view. It can always only be a limitation.
Now, what I was trying to get to before I got it now, he is working now from the point of view that there are other minds having similar kinds of experiences as his, and similar kind of experience of an external world where they have a slightly different angle, right? That's axiomatic because he doesn't have direct access to that experience. He only has his own experience, right? Now, these little jumps being made here, right? This is what is going to make these dudes fail in their attempts to convince the world of idealism, right? Because they make these little jumps into taking something for granted, right? And that's why they have to keep pounding on this philosophy to make people understand it. And when they have done that for 2.5 hours, people lean back and think, it sounds fanciful and it sounds interesting, but I'm not sure what the hell is going on here, right? No wonder, because they're making these little leaps here and there without stating that they're making the leaps. And I have to conclude that they don't understand that they're doing it, right?
Of what is really there. So perception by definition is limited and inaccurate.
By definition, yeah, but it's by definition, a perception is not related to any other perception, because as I said before, you do not have access to other people's potential experiences, right? You can axiomize and say, I am working from the idea or the axiom that they do have, fine. But that's an axiom I could choose not to work from if I don't want to work from it, right? You're not some kind of God descending from the philosophical heavens and telling people this is how you should understand it, right? You have to leave room for people to choose whether or not they want to follow your philosophy. And that's, in my opinion, is where the axioms come in. This I cannot reason my way to, right? I can only axiomize it because I do not have access to that, right? That follows from your basic insight that there is this paradox in metaphysics, in materialism, right?
It doesn't mean I'm not invalidating it. It has a purpose, as Bernardo says, but it must give us an inaccurate picture of reality.
Something
inaccurate. But, well, just a few seconds before, Bernardo Kastrup said that it's accurate and precise information. And now this guy, Spira, says it's inaccurate. What the hell are they talking about, man? Essentia Foundation, right? What is it not the screwed up philosophy foundation, right? They haven't cleared their philosophy. They're talking east and west, man, right? It's bullshit. They're not in agreement, right? It can't be a foundation if they don't have a foundation, right? Oh, man.
thing I've heard that you say, Bernardo, that made a bit of sense to me was the idea of, for example, a computer game. You're playing a computer game and let's say you're moving your character around and he can go through a world. But if you saw the actual world of the computer game, it would be all these, ones and zeros, and it would just be absolutely nonsensical. So there's an equivalence there.
It has to be sensical in some way. Otherwise, those people creating these circuits and channeling electrons around in whatever metallic structures, they have to be, somebody have to know what the hell is going on. You might not know it, but somebody must know at least some parts of it, right? It reminds me of an old, which is a very, very, very good book to read if you want to understand capitalism, right? And I don't mean capitalism in this screwed up communist fashion, right? Capitalism is basically what happens when you don't screw around with people and the way they trade with each other, right? It's called iPencil. I think it's by somebody called Lawrence Reed, but I'm not sure about I think it's Reed, but I'm not sure about Lawrence, right? I think it's Lawrence Reed, but it's called I, comma, pencil, right? Me, a pencil, right? It describes how complicated it is to create a pencil, and nevertheless, just by, voluntary interactions between hundreds and hundreds of people adding a little piece to this thing, a pencil arrives in a store where you could go buy it for $1, right? There's graphite, there's certain kind of cedar tree, I think. There's a brass for the rubber at the end, and the rubber, and there's sort of, paint and printing in gold on the sides, and all these things. There's no one person who knows how this works. No one person can make that fucking pencil, right? You could go out possibly and make a pencil of what you could find in your vicinity, but it wouldn't fucking be a pencil as we know it, right? And it probably wouldn't work as well, right? And it would take you a huge amount of resources and time and frustration and so on, rather than go do what you think is do best, which is go and be a grocer, maybe, right? Or, work night shift or drive a cab or something. And then go back and buy that pencil that somebody else, a number of people created, so you can go buy it for what takes you maybe 10 minutes, 2 minutes to produce in your work, right? Thereby, we switch our efforts in the most efficient way we can possibly do, without anybody, single person, actually understanding what the hell is going on with how to create that fucking pencil, right? Go read that book. It's possibly the most important economics book ever. Only rivaled by the one called Economics in One Lesson by Hazlitt, right? Economics in One Lesson and iPencil, and you're good to go, right? All right.
We have evolved in order to generate a representation of the world that is conducive to our survival, not necessarily one that reflects the truth of how the world is in and of itself. That's not amenable to survival. So yeah, there is a difference between accuracy and truthfulness, and we perceive largely accurately.
So now again, a new term pops in, right? Now I don't want every single fucking term to be defined in a discussion necessarily, right? But there are different levels of importance for certain terms, right? True is one of those I would like to have a definition of, right? Like knowledge and existence and these kinds of words, right? These are cornerstones of any philosophy, in my opinion. And if you just throw them around as if everybody understands it, it should be taken as if you do not care whether or not people have the good understanding. And if you do not care if people have a good understanding of an important term, it might as well be because you don't want them to have that. So you want to get away with some kind of bullshit philosophy and sneak it under the door or something like that by just throwing around term as if everybody understands it, right?
But not in a truthful way, in the sense that the appearances are not the world. Why would they be? There is absolutely no reason for them to be.
Yeah. So take reality.
No, it's even better than that. They can't be. If you're creating an inside-outside dichotomy, right? And they talk about this dissociation in mind and all of that, and I don't buy that for 1 second, right? Because it's ridiculous. But we'll get to that possibly, right? If you're creating that inside-outside dichotomy and you're saying that the mind is where you have access to your experiences, which is the only reasonable approach, right? Then that outside is not accessible, right? It's just that follows from your own axiomatic statement that I'm working from this inside-outside dichotomy because I don't want to be a solipsist, right? So I'm working from this inside-outside. And then it follows my experiences are on the inside and there's an outside I do not have access to. Otherwise, if you also have access to that, you need to explain how you get that access, because you created the dichotomy between because there was something you felt you did not have access to, or at least there was some kind of experience that qualified this kind of axiom, right? And then you need to settle that which you're referring to when you're saying, for instance, elephant. That must be the insight, as Bernardo also says, right? That must be the experience. And he says there's no reason to think that that's the actual thing. Well, I would say it cannot possibly be the actual thing, right? Because it is on the experiential side of this impenetrable wall you have put up yourself by creating this dichotomy, right?
Seriously, but not literally.
Correct.
So, Rupert, just to go back to that solipsism point, and I found this quite interesting while doing a bit of research for this, is how it can be easily misunderstood. So, solipsism, correct me if I'm wrong, is the belief that nothing exists outside of our finite mind, even outside of my own finite mind. And some people believe, and I've seen this on threads, it's actually quite common, that, for example, idealism is in line with that. But actually, it's the other way around. Materialism is more in line with that than non-duality. Rupert, can you field this one?
Yes. The belief that idealism is synonymous with solipsism is at best a misunderstanding of what idealism entails, and at worst, and as you say, is very common nowadays, a complete misrepresentation of idealism. And it's pernicious because many people who would genuinely be open to the possibility of idealism dismiss it on the grounds of its association with solipsism, which is...
No, but in the thinking, when you, I'm jumping in here, right? In the chain of thinking, when you, as let's say, a materialist, realize that there's a paradox in this kind of thinking, right? Then the structure of your thinking, the Cartesian doubt, leads you to a point where it becomes more or less solipsist, right? You end up with saying, well, I think, therefore I am, right? And basically, there's thinking, right? And I'm aware of it, something like that. And that is solipsist. I mean, how else would you put it, right? It's close enough for rock and roll for me, right? So, and then you say, okay, I can't stay there. I can't just sit there and say, I think, therefore I am. I have to get food, and, these people might want to kill me, whatever. These guys over there want to tax me or something like that, right? And these guys over there want to tell me there's only mind or something like that. I need to deal with this, right? So in order to approach it, I need to start on adding or stating some axioms that, okay, I'm going to work from this, I'm going to work from that, and I'm going to work from the other, right? When you start to do these axioms, you are jumping out of solipsism, right? And idealism is, to some extent, a jumping out of solipsism. But it's if I understand them correctly in the way they clarify what they mean by idealism, it is that they are sort of just extending their own mind to everything, right? Or extending them, maybe that's the wrong way to put it. They are diminishing their own mind to be a subset of a larger mind. And thereby not bringing in some dualist extra stuff or secondary kind of stuff or another kind of stuff that has to be somehow explained, right? But my contention would be that, well, you cannot have one thing because you need to have some kind of reference to how you get to that one thing. How do you get to one thing called mind? Did you experience mind? Well, there's a hard problem, but there's a problem of other minds, which is you can't experience other minds. Maybe you cannot experience mind altogether, right? And therefore, you cannot use mind as a foundation, as some kind of superstring theory for philosophy, right? It just doesn't work. And when we get further down the line in their kind of conclusion called idealism, it becomes all sort of, they use all kinds of abstractions that you cannot go and check yourself to jump around in their fanciful descriptions of what might the hell be going on out there, right? They stay with abstractions and concepts and mathematics and geometry and whatever, right? Not something with a direct connection to something you yourself can directly experience, right? Yes, if they say there are ripples out there, you could experience a ripple on a lake, but there's not a ripple on a lake out there, right? Because that's experiential and cognitive. So they're screwing around with your concepts and diluting or creating this singularity of reduction base that is not based on something you can experience. That is never going to fly. I want to warn you very strongly. Think about this, right? Something that you cannot go and check yourself using your senses. Because the senses, or the perception created potentially by your senses, is the closest thing you have to whatever it is, right? It's not your mathematics, which is some kind of derivative from these experiences. That is even further away from whatever that is beyond your experiences, right?
I would suggest it's a philosophy that doesn't even get off the ground. As you say, it's not solipsism. As you say, it's the belief that all there is to reality is not the content of our individual minds. It's the content of my mind. All I can be sure about is the content of my own mind. Therefore, you two, for instance, you are just images on my screen. You are not having experience now.
I'm not sure. I don't consider myself solipsist. So I'm not really sure what it entails to be solipsist, to be quite frank, right? I would just say that if you are in a Cartesian doubt mode, where you go back to sort of something that along the lines of, I think, therefore I am, right? Then you are in solipsism. You can't go any deeper without just saying, not saying anything, right? There's sort of a ground floor there. There's sort of a philosophical ground floor, you could say, right? You can't dig any deeper than that, you could say. But if you stay there, somehow say, okay, there's experiences and so what, sort of, right? And you don't analyze it or settle on anything further than that, that would be sort of hardcore solipsism. Now, if you're saying, okay, I have experience, and he's talking about other individuals, then it's no longer solipsist, is it? Because then you have classified something within your experience as being outside, right? There's not little people walking around in your mind, so to say. Or maybe that's what solipsists say, but then they're talking to themselves, right? They're talking to their own mind, somehow, right? So, I have never seen a solipsist, because I won't hear from them, right? They won't make videos. They won't go and talk to me. They will just, I don't know, they would lie somewhere and just, look at their fun experiences. Right? How would a solipsist act? I've possibly never seen one, because they are nowhere. They die as soon as they're born, right? So it's like, you could also say, if you have been a materialist for 25 years and then realize this paradox and then end up becoming a solipsist, then you're sort of saying, okay, now that I have come to this conclusion, I was wrong in 25 years going around keeping myself alive. But you needed to be alive for 25 years in order to figure out that you were a solipsist, right? So you had to not be a solipsist for 25 years in order to get to the point where you could figure out you're a solipsist and then lay down and die, right? It just doesn't sound smart to me, right? Okay.
My mind, and not only my mind, but all there is to my mind is this. All there is in existence is my study in Oxford. There's nothing even. There's no house. There are no other beings. It's
What? But no. You are not only. I mean, as you move around, right, which is also an implicit rejection of solipsism, you could say, right? Because you are interpreting possibly you could say there's a problem of other minds, right? Could be a zombie, right? But let's say I'm working from the axiom that they have a mind, right? Then if they're walking around, they are using that mind. That might be also necessary to state an axiom there. Let's do that. So I would consider them to not be solipsist, right? I mean, if they're moving around, there's something that spurs them to move around. What could that be beyond their experiences, right? There could be some zombie that's just walking around, you're trying to eat brains, whatever, right? But I don't find that likely, right? So, I would think that a solipsist is doing some bad logic. And it's the problem of saying, not being able to say, I don't know, or knowledge is impossible, right? People can't leave it alone. So either they're going to fabulate like these dudes do about what is out there, or they are saying, well, there is no out there, and become complete solipsist, right? Instead of saying, there might be an out there, and I'm going to state it axiomatically, but I can't get to it, but I still have my experiences, right, I can work with. That's my approach. I'm sort of stuck in the middle there. Yes, I can go and say there is an outside, but that doesn't mean I have to go and tell you what it is, because I can't get to it, right? So I don't know what you would call my kind of conclusion on metaphysics. I don't really care. It's better than rather than saying solipsist is bad or dualism is bad or whatever is bad or good or so on. These groupings where you have to align yourself with some kind of agenda or some kind of and people who are known to be idealists. And if you say you're an idealist, then you are being lumped into the group of these people who are sort of this way, right? I don't like that.
It's a form of madness, and it's remarkable how often in.
So now people who are taking the route through solipsism, they are mad or what? I mean, he must have been around solipsism before he started to jump into idealism. You can't jump from physicalism. I suppose that he has been physicalist at some point, right? I don't actually know. I have a slight suspicion that this guy was, brought up as a Christian, right? And therefore he needs this kind of woo-woo shit in order to justify all the, death cult shit he was force-fed as a young man, right?
Non-dual in the circles that I operate in, perhaps more than Bernardo, although there's quite a lot of overlap, more and more so these days. But it's remarkable how many people misunderstand idealism or the non-dual philosophy and equate it with solipsism.
Maybe that's because idealists are very bad at explaining their philosophy, their metaphysics, right? When they explain their metaphysics, people cannot follow it, right? And as I pointed out before, these little jumps between something that has more connotations along the materialist understanding of your experience and using that to explain idealism, right? All these little jumps and unexplained terms used and so on only clouds the judgment of whether or not this is good philosophy, right? And if it's not good philosophy, you're not going to trust the conclusion based on that philosophy.
And in this way, bring it into disrepute.
Let
me just say one more thing. What idealism really means, or what the perennial non-dual understanding suggests, is not that reality is contained in an individual mind, or even the sum total of all individual minds. It suggests that reality takes place in a universal consciousness.
So that's one mind, isn't it? So there is one mind. There's just one solipsist mind, apparently, and you are apparently a subset of that solipsist mind, right? It's okay to be solipsist if you're God, right? Apparently. But you, little peon, you're just a little insignificant, unworthy little subsection of this huge subjectivity, right? It's, you be careful here, right? Listen careful to how they do this.
And is ultimately made of that, or is the activity of that universal consciousness. So non-duality or idealism.
Now it's universal consciousness. Aren't they conflating the idea of mind and consciousness now? I'm not sure. I haven't followed all the terms used strictly, so I'm just trying to do it on the fly here, right? But consciousness, and I think they have used the term mind. Now he's using the term consciousness. Is that the same? Is mind and consciousness the same? Because he is equating it, right? Now, this points to me, it points out perfectly why people think that these people are crazy, man, right? Because they're throwing terms around, they're jumping from, there might be colors, and it's all one mind. It's like, okay, hold on, man, right? And you're fucking scaring people, man, right? This big one mind, and you're just, what? How the hell did you get to do that just like, out of the blue? Because I'm not solipsist, therefore there's only one mind. But didn't you just say you couldn't be solipsist and say there's only one mind? Yes, but you, little peon, your mind is not one mind. You're just some subset of a bigger mind. It's like, okay, hold on, mate. What the hell have you been smoking, man, right?
It states that everything is in consciousness, not everything is in the finite mind. There's a big difference.
This starts to sound to me like connecting the dots in a sort of agenda-driven way, right? He has already, in the back of his head, an idea of where this philosophy should lead, right? Because what is inflicted on you as a child and your parents and so on, that weighs much deeper than any kind of good philosophy, right? Because at the end of the day, these guys are talking very much about anxiety, and particularly Bernardo Kastrup, right? Maybe they are just inflicting a kind of philosophy on the world that makes them feel less anxious about whatever shit they have been force-fed during their childhood, right? This guy looks like a Christian to me, right? I'm prejudiced now, right? But I'm taking a wild guess here, right? And certainly Bernardo Kastrup, at least he has been brought up by a Catholic mother from Latin America, right? And a father who was apparently very scientific. So I guess this woman, she must have been pretty, right? Otherwise, why would you stick your dick in crazy, right? So his father died when he was, I think it was 12 years old, something like that. You may correct me, right? And then this crazy mother has, screwed with his mind ever since, basically, right? Apparently, he's not very close to his mother because of this dichotomy between science and woo-woo shit, right? But in any case, it has created some anxiety he needs to deal with in order to have, some control of his life that doesn't make him go into, dissolving, right? And this philosophy comes in some kind of self-medication that inhibits anxiety. And in order to not feel that anxiety, even though you have the philosophy that could sort of, keep you calm, you need to inflict it on the rest of the world and make them do the same thing because you're sort of, the whole world has to be my way, otherwise I have anxiety. Right?
Actually, Bernardo, before I come to you, Rupert, could you just then, the best metaphor...
Maybe there's also one thing that is a problem with philosophy. Philosophy has become something that only a select few people apparently can do, right? And I hope I could be a proponent of somebody well, I have a halfway higher education, you could say, right? I don't like the term higher education, but you know what I mean, right? I can think for myself, I can do science and, whatever, right? I can fix a computer and whatever shit, right? But this thing but you don't have the papers. You need the papers by the government to be allowed to be calling yourself a philosopher or do philosophy. If you don't have the papers, I'm not trusting you. And then if you get the paper by some arbitrary dude somewhere who has lived all his life in academia, all of a sudden it's okay for you to say whatever fuck you want to say without being challenged in any way. This is also ridiculous, right? And also this guy who says, I'm not worthy to interview you, you little gods of philosophy. You're so great, I'm here, I'm not worthy. I'm bowing down in the grovel, right? Bullshit, man. Bullshit. You need to scrutinize everything. You need to scrutinize what I say, right? Don't just eat it raw. Do your own thinking. And if you don't have a thinking, go get a thinking before you just adapt to my thinking in this particular area, right? Okay.
For me, is the dream metaphor. So could you just illustrate it with that at this point?
Yes, it's the analogy that I use most often. It's my equivalent to Bernardo's dissociation identity disorder. Yes, imagine Mary falls asleep in London. She dreams she's Jane on the streets of Paris. Now, some people object when I say this because they say, well, I'm the same person in my dream than I am in real life. Why do you give them two different names? Only for ease of communication. So just so that I can communicate easily. So Mary falls asleep in London. She dreams she's Jane on the streets of Paris. And then now from Jane's point of view, Jane represents the finite mind. That is each of us. All of us are like Janes in the dream or the imagination of a universal consciousness. Now, from Jane's point of view, she closes her eyes, the streets of Paris disappear. She opens them again, they reappear. And she reasonably concludes from this that whatever it is that is perceiving the streets of Paris lives just behind her eyes. And this is corroborated when she closes her ears, etc. And everybody else on the streets of Paris, all her friends, think the same thing. And from this, they build this model that whatever it is that knows my experience lives in my brain.
I just remember something else I wanted to say, and it was along the lines, and I'm jumping in here while I have it present in my head, right? The thing about authorities of philosophy, I think this stems from this idea that everybody has to agree on the philosophy before things have been solved, right? So everybody is chasing the possibility of convincing the whole world of the same philosophy. I think this has been a futile attempt ever since, Socrates, right? Or even further back. You don't have to convince everybody about your philosophy being right? It's like all these people competing for who Jack the Ripper was, right? And they all have their pet subject or what's it called? Not a subject. What's it called when you suspect? That was the word. The pet suspect. That I think this guy did it, and therefore all the other theories are wrong, right? Maybe it's a bad analogy, but I think a problem in philosophy is that everybody has to agree on the philosophy, on the politics, this is how you should understand it, right? No, that's not how you do it. You need to leave room for everybody else to think for themselves, right? That doesn't mean you can't explain your philosophy. And people might be convinced you are actually on the right track and they want to adapt to your philosophy because they are thinking along the same lines. Something they overlooked and say, I agree with you, and so on, right? But they have to come to it by their own accord. I mean, it helps maybe to sit here and deconstruct a video or them presenting their idealism and so on, right? Fine. But it's not because You must convince everybody that you are right. You need to leave room for people to say, I don't agree with you, right? And how do you approach that in a philosophical way? It seems that nobody have any approach this way. And that's why I say this is where the axioms come in, right? If you have it argued from a reduction base all the way to a moral principle, using a significant or a structured, argued in a structured manner with a series of axioms and definitions, that if somebody else doesn't agree with you on this sort of ground floor, well, then you don't interact with them, right? Or at least it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to. If somebody disagree with me on axiom 37 or something like that, let's just put it that way, then I could say, okay, I guess it's fine that I just want to buy a carrot from you and then bye-bye, right? Fine. But if I want to get married to the person, it might be a good idea that we agree on all the basic axioms, for instance, right? And if the other person cannot argue in any rigid manner philosophically for why they agree on these kinds of axioms, it might be because they don't know what shit from fuck, right? Shit about fucking. And then you shouldn't engage with them, right? And it's also this kind of, hey, we are in a society, we are all together here, and we have to agree on everything, and therefore we have democracy, where the majority is, screwing around with the minority, because the majority has to decide on a bullshit, right? That's also sort of a rejection of the individual as a thinking thing, while at the same time these people consider themselves superior individuals, can go around and telling people that I'm perfect, I have the superior hypothesis, called analytic idealism, as Bernardo Kastrup says, right? Isn't that some kind of megalomania? I would say so, right? Because it doesn't leave room for the individual. And this mind at large shit is going to turn into something that is a big mind culture out there that is directing you, little peon. You just have to accept what is being presented to you, right? It all starts to reek of communism and all sorts of mind-fucking shit like that, right?
And everything that I experience externally, the world, is outside the consciousness that I believe is located in my brain. And the name we give to that is matter. So from James...
Yeah, but then you are working from an axiom again, right? In your brain. Your mind is in your brain. So what are you referring to when your mind is in your brain? The brain is also in your mind. So your mind can't be in your brain if your brain is also in your mind. That's circular, without you stating exactly what kind of axioms you're working from, right? You need to be fucking strict with this. Otherwise, people are just going to say, I don't believe this shit, man, right? These people are crazy.
This point of view, her experience, is divided into mind on the inside, which in this context we can use synonymously with consciousness. In other contexts, I would make a distinction. But in this context, we can say Jane's experience is divided into consciousness on the inside and matter on the outside. Moreover, she then, I don't have to elaborate the whole analogy, she believes that the world made out of matter precedes.
The world? What is the world? What is that? The world that we see. What are the world that we hear and the world that we smell and so on? Again, this is a fluffy, right? It's like, okay, you can have a few things where you don't go into deep discussions of the definition of terms, but now we are on term number 10 or 12 or 13 or something like that, and there's still no definitions, and they're just thrown around in this gumbo that without any heads or tails, in my opinion, right? Now, I might have an idea what they're talking about because I'm coming sort of from the same kind of basics, right? But somebody who hasn't got a clue about this, they would say, what the fuck are they talking about, man, right?
It's the consciousness with which she experiences it. So she believes, along with all her friends and colleagues, that the matter which exists outside of her mind gives rise to consciousness, hence the materialistic model. It grows out of this point of view. Of course, when Mary wakes up, she thinks, oh, No, that's just how it appeared from Jane's limited, localized, and ultimately illusory point of view. What was really taking place was that the single indivisible field of my own mind, consciousness, albeit a limited consciousness in this context, was within itself. It was assuming simultaneously the form of the dream and the form of the subject in the dream, from whose perspective the dream was.
God, I don't know what he's talking about, right? Why doesn't he say? Why don't he? Just like he talked about this microscope in the last part, right? Yes, if you put our philosophies, compare them under a microscope, it might be, you need a microscope to find differences in our philosophy. You do not use microscopes when you're doing philosophy. So that analogy, why are you using an analogy rather than trying to get to the point? And why don't it? Maybe it's a sign of the weakness of their approach to philosophy, which is, I have created a reduction base. Now I'm going to just throw around terms over here without any connection to that reduction base. And because the reduction base is mind, it's like it's all present. It's always there. Yeah, there's a reduction base, but because it's everywhere, it's actually nowhere, right? So you do not have a reduction base by saying it's all mind. It's basically saying nothing, right? It has to be something that is, if you reduce it to something, it has to be something you can approach, something you can experience, something you can reference by your own accord. Because if I can't do that, I don't give a shit about your reduction base, because it's disconnected from anything I can check up on, right? And this dream analogy, why are you using an analogy to describe your philosophy rather than stating your philosophy? Your philosophy cannot be an analogy. It has to be the thinking that is directly connected to that which you're trying to think about, right?
No. So the distinction between mind and matter, between the subject and the object, was only real from the localized.
Yes, but it's a problem that arrives. And that's why the heart problem arrives, right? Because of this misconception that you are actually experiencing an outside, right? The actual outside, the experience is the actual outside. And therefore, it sort of, from that logic, it must follow that the mind at some point appears from that description. And if that description is called matter, if elephant is matter, then that matter is everywhere, and therefore this mind must somehow appear from this matter. But the foundations of this philosophy is screwed up because it's built on this paradox. And it's the paradox you need to point to, rather than create, I would say, now I'm not telling you what to do, but I don't find this dream analogy convincing, right? If you don't understand the paradox, as I alluded to, you won't get the point of this analogy, in my opinion.
Perspective of Jane in the dream, but when Mary wakes up, it's the whole thing is one infinite, indivisible whole, made out of pure consciousness.
Yeah.
Made out of pure now it's certainly not. It's mind and consciousness, pure consciousness. What is the difference between consciousness and pure consciousness? Right now, he's making this. When you're adding a term to another term, it is to clarify or qualify that term in a certain fashion. Rather than saying consciousness, he's saying pure consciousness. So what's the difference? Why did you add the term pure? Right? What does that add or differentiate from the term as it was before you added the term pure, right? All these kind of sophist little tricks is problematic.
So the dreams that we have at night are just a microcosm of reality
exactly.
at large.
All we need to do is take the analogy I've given and just raise it one level up. That in the waking state, we are all Janes, localized perspectives of infinite consciousness within infinite consciousness.
I don't think they... I know that I have seen these arguments before by these guys, particularly Bernardo Kastrup, right? But have they argued for why they arrive at this big mind thing? It's just like it sort of slipped under the door. Oh, there it was. Big mind. Mind everywhere. Consciousness everywhere. A pure consciousness everywhere, right? And they're switching between the terms. I don't think they have argued. It's like it's just like, that's how it is, right? They can't argue their way to it, right? And if you can't argue or reason their way to it, they should stop and say, I cannot argue for this. I cannot reason my way to this. And for me to go any further from where I am now, I need to state this axiom, right? This axiom is, okay, I am going with this understanding, right? I can't reason my way to it, but I can state it. And if you disagree with me, fine. Let's part ways then, if that's the ultimate conclusion, right?
From whose point of view, infinite consciousness perceives itself, its own activity, as an apparently physical universe.
Yeah.
Ooh, it perceives itself? What is perception, right? Now I'm confused, right? Is this big mind having senses that they can use to perceive stuff? So what is senses made? Is senses also made of mind? The big mind has senses that is sort of outside my mind. Otherwise, it couldn't perceive anything. Perception is connected with senses, right? What the hell is he saying, man? This goes actually along what Robert Roast, I think, sorry if I butcher your name, but I think you were called Robert Roast, used recently in the comments of my Bernardo Kastrup videos. This goes along with what you're saying, right? That, what the hell is this mind? What is that? Subjectivity or whatever it is, consciousness, mind, all these terms floating around. If it is perceiving something, what is it? Is it perceiving itself? Does it have a little eye and a little ear somewhere, and then it's sort of perceiving itself? Why does it need to do that if it's already a mind? A mind is on the other side of perception. This is fucking screwed up, man, right?
Now, Bernardo, would you mind, before we get the dissociated alters, I want to come...
And I don't like this. Bernardo, this smirky grin. Maybe that's just, you know, an idiosyncrasy of mine, right? It's sort of this smirking. I have a superior hypothesis, right? I'm so superior, right? Yes. Oh, I have my designer glasses, right? Oh, I'm so superior, right?
Come to later because the research was fascinating. But could you just...
And I have 2 PhDs, right? Paid by the taxpayers who can't get a PhD, right?
Share your analogy around another beautiful one, the sort of infinite river with whirlpools within it, which is another way of saying the same thing, but it's definitely worth hearing.
The motivation for that was a model that some people use, the transceiver model of the brain, that the brain doesn't generate consciousness, it just receives it. The problem is that there is a built-in dualism to that. You know, if you have a coffee filter, the filter is not made of coffee. So if the brain is a filter, then filtering consciousness, then presumably the brain is not made of consciousness. But that, I think, would be a wrong conclusion. As Rupert just beautifully explained, everything is in consciousness and of consciousness. So what's actually going on? So the analogy of the whirlpool is an attempt to solve this seeming dilemma. If you go to a river and you find a whirlpool, you can delineate the boundaries that whirlpool precisely and say the whirlpool is here and not there, and these are the boundaries.
But the whirlpool is a representation of something outside my mind I do not have access to. I can't use that whirlpool to describe that which you are making a materialist deduction here, right? Or analogy, I don't even know what word to put on it, right? You're using experiential or cognitive or sort of mathematical models or whatever that is derived from experience in order to describe that which you do not have access to. I don't buy that shit, right? That is manipulative. You are violating your own philosophy here.
Of the whirlpool, it has an obvious individuality to it, an obvious localization to it. The water in the whirlpool keeps turning around the same point, the same center, while the rest of the river flows.
And this also reminds you that this is what happens when you do not have a reduction base that is anchored in experience, direct experience, right? If you put yourself in a abstract reduction base, you can stay with all these abstractions and screw them around as you see fit in order to explain whatever you want to explain. In that area, nobody can go and check because they don't have experiences there, right? This is basically one big sophist screwed up trick, right? And in the end, I will have to consider this an attempt at manipulative control, right? And it also always reeks of this superiority or elitism. The little people, right? We have found this dude to interview us, and he's basically not worthy, but we let him interview us. He is several levels below us, and he will say that himself, that he is not worthy and he's too stupid for this shit, right? This sort of, we have to sit here in our ivory tower telling people, you should understand that I have spoken with a big mind, and it has told me you're not worthy, right? Oh.
Goes away. So the idea is that our brain and its brain activity, the rest of our body, it's not generating consciousness. It's the image of a certain localization of the stream of consciousness.
Absolutely. You're looking at that which create consciousness from the outside of consciousness, you could say, right? By using the consciousness, right? It's sort of a very, very convoluted, this thing, right? But when you're referring to brain and senses and whatever, it is the thing, these aspects out there that creates the experience is represented by the experience. But because it's the experiential version, it is not the actual version, because it doesn't come with a manual, right? It's not like the eye, the first time light traveled through an eye, that the eye said, hey, remember this message of how I should be understood. And when you get the insight to the mind, you know how to represent me. The light doesn't come with a manual, right? So when the mind received this light insight, it has already come through the eye. The mind doesn't know there is an eye, right? But because of evolution, it has started to do shit with these lights and these tastes and so on, and representing it in a way that functions toward the goal, which is survival, right?
In the same way that the whirlpool is the image of a certain localization of water in a flowing stream. And brain activity correlates with experience because it's the image thereof. The image of a phenomenon, of course, correlates with the phenomenon it's an image of. The body doesn't generate consciousness. It's just what a localization of consciousness looks like from the outside. And you can delineate the boundaries of the body and say, here is the body, in the same way that you can delineate the boundaries of the whirlpool and say, here is the whirlpool. Yet, just like there is nothing to the whirlpool but water, you can't lift the whirlpool out of the river. There's nothing to it but the same water as the river. There is only the river. In the same way, there is nothing to the body but consciousness. It's just the image of a certain localization of conscious contents.
Okay, we stop here, closing in on the 1 hour mark. I'll see you in the next part, and I hope you enjoy this. Please share, like, and subscribe. Consider joining the board, link below, and consider giving me a donation if you think I'm doing a good job here. So, otherwise, see you in the next one. Have a nice day.